So in this part I would like to go over the refinements I did to our initial first scene and how I came to this result here from our scene before. Let's first go over what we have right now. So we have some of the eyebrow features we saw in the reference, like that it's getting pointy here. We have some nice flow going on here. We have like the bigger clumps from the ears coming out. We have like the fluffier feeling of the ears. We have some flyaways here to break up the silhouette. We have some of the directional flow here, the bigger areas with clumping like this one here, then like the smaller clumps running into it. Here the frizzy part on the bottom. We also got like those tight clumps going on here. What else? I painted a thickness map to have thinner hair in front here, and I made them a little bit more sparse, so I changed the density map. Also changed the group, so we have more hair going up to the eye and starting lower already. And yeah, that's about it, what we have right now. There is still area to improve, which will be a next step, like the transition here. Those clumps are a little bit too tight. Here, like the combing, like the sculpting doesn't fit yet. Those hairs here are a little bit too long. They need to stand out a bit more here. We have to tweak the thickness maps. Like here they're getting too thin and it's feeling too fluffy a little bit. But for now, that is fine. We're also gonna use this setup now for the body before we later on continue with improvements. What is also missing is the parting. This will be the next video. So let's check out the scene and how I came to the current result, what we have here. Let me start with the global settings. You saw that I changed my material. So when I go to the hair shader, I changed a little bit with the colors and so on, so we have a better visual feedback of how our clumping and structure looks. That's all about the shader. Then about the skin. Let's start with the skin, what we did here. I added an attribute in our skin node called thickness. Let me also disable the groom. Called thickness, and then added the paint node, which overrides the thickness attribute, so we can paint. And this is what our thickness attribute looks like right now and how it's used. All right, then this thickness attribute needs to travel through our graph so we can use it in the hair. So on the groom node itself, when we go down, we have a skin attribute transfer. So that transfers skin attributes to our groom. And I use the point attribute thickness here. So we have like the normal, fur direction, position, and thickness. That's like those three are there by default, and that one is the one we added. So it takes like that point attribute from the skin and moves it to our groom. And once that is transferred through a groom, we have to go to the hair node, to attributes, and do the same here. So the skin attribute, we transfer the thickness. And once that is done, on the thickness tab, we can just use this attribute here. Normally it is on no override, so we just put it to skin attribute, and then here there is nothing which shows up. I'm not sure why, so what works, you just paste the name, hit enter, and it will use that attribute now. I also changed a little bit the ramp for the thickness, and I changed the density, so I put it to 750 now, since we have a little bit thicker hair. I changed like the maximum guide count, and that's about it. So next step is our groom. Let me enable that guy. So I enable the groom. Takes a second to recache the stroke or reapply everything. All right, so this is how our groom looks right now. I added a lot more guides on the areas of the eyebrows and the ears, especially since we needed the detail there. And yeah, overall just planted more guides in the plant node. This is still the same with blasting and so on, like the deleting of one side. Then the paint length is still the same. Let me show you the length. So this is our length map right now, or attribute. And yeah, that's all the same. Also, like if the setting of the length is the same. And our brush guides is also the same, just with more. What I added is that set length node here after the brush guides. So, but it is disconnected from our actual graph. We only use that for visualization. What that means is, normally when I paint my length, I can say, okay, I can enable this node and now I can paint, but I only see it undeformed. So now when I want to see my length changes on the deformed guides, I can add a set length afterwards and use that paint length for my skin input. So I get that attribute from before the brush guides and then adjust the length afterwards. So when I enable that and now paint the length, you see that suddenly our length changes. What doesn't change is like the groom itself. When I now select the groom, you see that the change I just made is not visible. This is because we have to recache the strokes first, so the input geometry for the guide groom updates again. Once we do that, we will see the change of the length. We already see it here on that node because this node doesn't need an update. So we can see it here, we can see it here, but to actually have it in the graph later on, we need to recache the strokes. Let me undo this here. I think now we are back to what we had. All right, so that's only what I added for visualization. Then I added a band guide modifier, like it's a guide process. What it does is I just use it to push some of my guides. Let me enable it. You can see it on the side of the neck to bend some guides outwards. I could have done that in my brush guides, but it's easier this way because like the lift tool itself doesn't work that nicely. So I painted a map there and used it in the guide process. And now I use another guide groom to cut my guides. Why I did that is, like here in the ears, I needed a nicer silhouette. So I just did cut some of the furs to get the silhouette. So if you enable the cut tool, you can just cut your guides here. I could have done that in the paint length, but when you think about that all those guides start on different positions of the mesh, painting the length then through the attribute is really hard when you want to get like a same endpoint. Yeah, after that, I just added the mirror and that's it. What I did remove is the resample node in our groom. The reason was when I resample my guides and then later use it in my fur description, like in my hair, there was an issue with the thickness. Like right now, each guide got the same amount of segments. It's like 8 segments. And what we did before with the resample is that we had less segments on the shorter fur. And at some point, this just screwed up our hair generator. So I removed the resample and I don't use it for now. I added 2 nodes here. They are not enabled because I'm not using them, but I would like to show what they do. Basically, I use a reguide, so I can increase my resolution for, for example, simulation. So the reguide just interpolates now, or like scatters new guides and uses the guides I already had. As you can see now, that's what we had before. It's not updating. Let me go out here. Okay. So that's our reguide. And this is what we had. And now I just merged them. So I have all the guides from which I planted. So I don't lose any detail because the reguide is not adding some like here. So to not lose any detail, I just merge them, and now I have like a higher resolution groom, which might be used for simulation or might be needed. But for now, for us, we disable that and leave it as like it is now. So those were the changes to the groom. Now let's start with the changes to our hair generator. Already talked about the thickness, that we added this attribute and use it here now. Then I did some density changes, and that's it. Let me enable the prune so we see less of our hair and enable our hair generation. And once we have that, we go into our hair generation node and go through the graph step by step, starting from the top. All right, so here's our graph. It became a little bit bigger. So let's start at the top. We apply a color here. So first we create an attribute with the UVs. Then we wrangle that one, like only the U value to the points of our hair, and then we use that for our color, just for the viewport. And we resample our fur here. So basically we just give it more samples so it fits for our scraggle. I added a little graph here just to show something about sampling or resampling and how you could do it based on a group selection or based on like a selection. So what I did here is I created an attribute transfer. So to transfer from our skin to our hair, and I transferred the length. That now creates, when I check here, a length attribute on our points of the hair. Now I promote that to the primitives. So it is now an attribute on each hair primitive. And now I create groups. Like you can already see in the viewport, this now creates a group called long hair. And it adds every hair which has a length which is bigger than 0.2. Then with a group combine, I create a group called short hair, and that group will contain all hairs which are not part of long hair, like equals all but long hair. So you can see now I have like two groups. I have this one and I have the one for the short hair. And then I can use two resample nodes, like one for my short hair when I enable the points again. Like one is for the short hair. Actually, it should be. So let me quickly check. Like I got long hair here, group combined short hair here. So I resample now. Oh yeah, so when I disable and enable it, you see like on the muzzle, on the nose area, it's getting resampled now. And when I go down to the long hair now and turn this on and off, it's only the longer hair which gets resampled. So this way you can split your sampling up if you want to. In our case here, I keep it with the resample we had, and let's go from here. So we have like this graph here, the subgraph, which basically creates a new hair generation node for our clumping. And we use like that attribute map here, the density big clumping, to control the density of this node. So once that is generated the hair, we resample it so we get more information, we get more points on it, and then we add some modifiers. Like first we add some wavy feeling on them. Then we set the length, so we create some randomization and make them bigger by default with the scale method. So it keeps the shape, does not only extend, it keeps the shape but scales them. And once we did that, I use a bend modifier. So let me show you in the viewport. When I turn this on and off, actually, oh, it doesn't do anything because I turned it off. I didn't want to use it for some reason. So never mind about this one. And then I create another attribute called clump, big clump. So when I show you this attribute here, it looks like this, and that actually clumps my hair here like this. It clumps them together. So, and this is what I use as input for the actual clumping on my hair. So now continue in our main graph of the hair. First we add some frizz. So it's just some slight frizz, which I add. After that, I have already my clumping. So when I turn that on, you see now we clump our fur to big clumps based on that map I painted here on the attribute. So once that is done, we continue with some frizz. And that frizz is also controlled by our clumping mask, which controls the clumping. And also in the masking, I use the length from our skin. So I use the length map we painted from the skin as a mask. So when I show you the mask, you can see that effect is applied more here because the hair is longer, and way less here because it's super short. All right, so we have the hair clumping, then we have the frizz, so we get that frizzy feeling in the long fur. So once we got the frizz on our big clumps, we would like to add our medium clumps. So when I go down the graph and enable the medium clumps, you can see that we now add some more clumping. And that is like the same as for the big clumps. We use a new graph here, like on the side, where we create our clumps. So what we do is we take our hair at this point of the big clumps, then we add a frizz, which uses the same mask as we used for the hair clump. So we just use the skin mask here, clump mask big, and we also use like the length attribute again as the skin attribute length. Let me actually quickly check one thing. I wonder if the length came directly or if we had to forward it. So it's not here. So the length directly came from the skin and we hadn't had to do anything. And we can just use the length, the skin attribute length. All right, so once we have that, I emit new hair, and like here the input, the rest skin and the animated skin is just my skin. And then as guides, I use my actual hair. So the new emitted hair is looking the same. We also had that in the basic setup. Then after I did that, like after I created some hair, I do use a frizz. Let me zoom in here and disable that. So we frizz off some of our tips a little bit. So I have like a clump medium frizz, an attribute I created here, a paintable one, which looks like this. And the painted attribute is then used in the input mask, and I also turned on the curve mask and gave it like a certain ramp. So we have like a more influence in the middle than less on the tips, and that's basically what it does. Once we have that, let me quickly check here what I did here. Oh yeah, so once we have that, we transfer the length attribute from our skin to our actual hair. So the attribute transfer here takes when we go here to that and check out our attributes, we don't have a length attribute on the newly created hair here. Once we use the transfer attribute, we have that length attribute on our points. Like each point of the hair now got that length stored. And now we use an attribute wrangle where we create a new variable or a new attribute called blend amount. So it's a float, and we create a blend amount attribute. And then we use an expression CK spline where we take the length and manipulate the length with that expression. Let me quickly explain the CK spline expression. So if I get an annotation here and make it blue and draw a graph, think about the CK spline, think about it as a curve in a two-dimensional graph. So we have a length attribute. Let me paint something like one. So let's say we have here a value of 2, here 1, and here we have 1 and 0.5. And now we say, okay, this axis here is actually the input attribute we give to that function. So it is length. And this here is the output value which the function gives us. So it's a value. All right, now let's check. Length contains already values. Like here, that hair could have a length of like 0.3, and here it could have a length of 2. So let's see what happens in this function. What the function does is it says, okay, the length of 0.3, like the second value is actually our x, and the first is our epsilon. It's a little bit confusing that it's switched around. So at a value of 0.3, it gives us 1. At a value of 2, it gives us 0. And that means we have something like, we have now a graph like this here. So whenever the value of length is below 0.3, it will give back a value of 1. Whenever it's bigger than 0.3, it will give back something in between those values here, like anything here. Like let's say the length is 1, then it will give us a value of 0.5. When it's 2, it would give us a value of 0. So that's what the CK-spline does now. And let me delete this and go out of the tool. Oops, delete and close the tool. So now we got this value, the blend amount, when I check here, on our points. And I can use this in my guide process. Let me actually turn off the groom and go back in. So when I turn off the mask and now disable this node, and check what we use. Like we use the blend amount here, which we've calculated before, and it has to be a guide attribute because we created that attribute on our actual guides, not on a skin. So when I turn it off, you can see a difference here, what it does. It actually does not much, but I added it so I get a better control of how we control our blend with the mask. I think I also have to turn this off to show it better. So now here you can see it better. When the hair gets longer, it's getting affected less by our operator here. And this is because at the length of 2, it gives back a value of 0. And at the length of 0.3, it gives back a 1. So the longer the hair becomes, the less this operator is applied, like this guide process is applied. So let me turn on the curve mask also. And what it does is it does just like this band operation we have. All right, after that, I use a set length to randomize the length a little bit. And then I use a lift, like a lift with a mask. And it's only to lift those hairs here on the top a little bit, as you can see. So when I turn this off, let me also turn off the mask and go to this top. You can see that we lift the hair in this area a little bit. And on all of them, we use some noise mask here to randomize that. And what we can see here is the input for our clumping mask. So the actual fur now clumps towards those hairs we created here. So when I turn on the clumping, now like the hair clumps towards those hairs created before, and it clumps towards them through those attributes here. So we can see in the tightness attribute, I use a map called clump medium tightness. So when I enable this, that's this map here. And what it does is, the higher this value is, the more the fur clumps towards the tip. So let me remove that for a second and show you what it means. Let me copy this value. Oops. Let me copy this value as said. When I turn it to 1, we get tighter clumps on the tips. When I turn it to 0, they get broader and less clumpy. So I had like this value. And now let's turn on our skin attribute again, because that was painted on the skin. And that's what we use. Then as a blend attribute generally for the clumping, I use another map, which is the one from the setup we had already, which is just a clump mask medium. And you can see that's like the mask painted now for clumping. All right, once everything is clumped, we frizz it again a little bit more. So we add some frizz in it. And that frizz is heavily based on a noise mask. So when I visualize the mask, you can see only a certain amount of hair is picked and is then getting that guide process frizz applied. And I also use like the clump mask medium again, so this effect only affects the areas where I actually have the medium clumps. So let's turn off the visualization here and continue in our graph. Next is we add, that was like a bend. I call it bend, but it's a frizz actually. But what it does is it bends the hair a little bit in random directions. Then I add another frizz, which is controlled by the clump mask. And let's see what that does. You can see it adds like a high frequency noise. So the hair is not so straight and gets frizzy. And once that is done, we paint a new attribute called clump mask small for the small clumping, the third layer of clumping, and we clump again. What do we use now as input for our clumping? Let me show. So you can see the graph splits here again. We have this here where we have our medium clumping, and now we split it and we get a group. What does this group? This is like a preset from here. You can use this 30% chance here, and that's just what we use here. So it just takes a random amount of fur based on this expression, and it moves that selection into the group small clumps. So once we have that group, I delete everything inside the group so we keep the rest of the fur. So let me go back and delete, and you can see like when I disable this here, what is actually left and what is deleted. So there are like hairs deleted, so we get a little bit less. And once we have that, we frizz them a little bit. So we add some random frizz there, so they are not all aligned the same way. We add another frizz on it, just to add even more randomization. This frizz I have to check where it actually affects the graph. So let me check what it does. Oh yeah, it just, when I zoom in, it just enables like a really slight higher frequency frizz. That's just some detail to add there. And then once that is done, I add another bend where you can see here on the top again, the bend the hair is bent a little bit, and for more randomization in this area. And I called the map here bend mask small, which I painted, which controls that area. All right, so this here is our input for the next level of clumping called hair clump small, which we had in the setup. And now we clump towards that. As you can see here, we have that additional layer of clumping. Now we say, okay, we want to frizz our clumping, like we want to reduce it a little bit by just breaking it up, especially on the tips. We do that by having a curve mask and a noise mask, so we control how many hairs hairs get applied to that frizz. You can see the mask here. And once we added that frizz, we also changed the length a little bit. So we randomized the length, and actually I would like to do it like this. So you can see we randomize the length of our fur. And once the length is randomized, we add that clumping in this area here where the tips get really tight clumped. So that's just on top of our actual fur. We take some tips and clamp them. So what do we use here as input? When you check out here where it comes from, it comes from the top here, which feeds into the hair clamping medium. Like this feeds into hair clamping medium, is used for the medium hair clamping. And now we use the same expression before, like we take a certain amount of strands and we delete them, and the remaining strands here, as you can see, are then lifted a little bit. And when I show that, it's just getting a random lift based on on this here. Like I used the blend amount, so that's what we calculated in the attribute wrangle before. Like in this here, I also use that as my mask here, and then I use the curve mask. So when I visualize the mask, we get this it gets applied to this mask here. All right, and this then, you see we only have like a small amount of clumps available, and we clump towards those here. And we use a really high tightness and a clump profile which is really tight on the tips. And this way we get like those really tight tips in there. Let me go back, and here you can see like here we enable those. All right, as a blend attribute, I use the clump medium tips. It's just another map where I control in which area I want to apply that effect. And then important is for this here is the clump size, and that this here is turned off. Because if you turn on and search beyond clamp radius, what it does now is it clamps everything to like those sparse inputs we have, and we don't want that. We want it to only clamp when it's within the clump size radius. And because we only have like some hairs, it only creates those random single clumps in here. Yeah, so that's basically how that setup works. And once we got them, we have another attribute wrangle here. So what we do is, let me enable that frizz first and see what it does. So it adds some frizz. If you go in here, you can see it adds some frizz, but it only adds them outside of that clump mask medium. So let me show you the mask. Oh, actually I can't because it's... Wait, so I'm confused. We actually don't use that, so I made that wrangle, but it's not used, so let's remove it. We don't want to have anything which is not used. But what it does is, it just inverts that mask we painted before. Like when I check it out, my clump mask medium, it's this here. And that expression just gives us the inverted value. So it would be red here now, and like 1 here and 0 here, because we say 1 minus the values. But we don't use that attribute, so let me remove it for you. And that's basically it. So after this, we're at output and we get to this result here. All right, I hope this was helpful. Now in the next part, it will be live again. I couldn't do this in a live session. I had to record it afterwards because it's just too much work to refine your stuff and get to a certain look. But mostly it's just about painting and seeing in which area you want to have which clumping effect going on, how you paint maps to break stuff up then with frizz and so on. So it's just about a lot of back and forth and checking out what works and what doesn't in adjusting your groom. And since this is very time consuming, I decided to make a recording after I'm at a certain point in my groom and just explain you the steps, what was done. All right, so in the next video, we do a live session about how we get the clumping lines in there. So we want to have clumping in here, parting lines. We want to have parting here and then going on in this area. And yeah, see you in the next video.